Well, China spent more than $230 billion US importing oil in 2013. Given that, one might think the current price drop would help that country's bottom line and spur lagging growth. Joining us now to help us understand what dropping oil really means to China is Lauren Brandt, professor of economics at the University of Toronto. Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
I want to pull up a map of China, just so we have it up there, and give a couple facts about China. So China is the world's leading oil consumer. It is the world's leading oil importer. It is the fourth largest producing nation of oil. And in 2013, it produced 4.45 million barrels a day. Okay, Lauren, as I said in the introduction, China spent roughly $234 billion to import oil in 2013. Aside from that figure going down, how will the current price drop in oil affect China?
Well, I think some of the things that you pointed out at the outset helps us begin to see that China is that there's both advantages as possibly as well as disadvantages.
Complex.
It's going to be a complex kind of issue, and so there's going to be both winners as well as losers, again, to the fact that these oil prices are coming down.
Okay.
On the one hand, China's going to be the importer, which means that they're going to be able to pay a lot less than what they're currently paying, but they also happen to be a producer as well. They've invested enormously in terms of trying to develop their capabilities within the domestic sector, within the domestic economy. They've gone out, they've tried to acquire, again, strategic reserves outside. The value of those reserves all of a sudden are a lot less than what they had been before. So this is going to be one of those cases of where there's going to be some winners, there's going to be some losers, there's going to be some opportunities, but there's also going to be some challenges as well.
So no overall guessing here. Betting, I shouldn't say guessing.
I think it's, when we talk about these kinds of things, I think it's really difficult, again, to make any kind of bets at all. I mean, certainly as an economist, we don't have a crystal ball. Today it may be the case that the price of oil is $45 a barrel. Nobody probably predicted a year ago or 18 months ago that oil prices are going to be this low. Then again, we're not exactly sure where they're going to be 6 months from now, a year from now. But one thing that we can say is that where it is going to depend significantly on what happens in China. Because I think what we always want to kind of keep in mind here is that one of the reasons why the price of oil today is perhaps as low as it is, certainly the fact that oil production in the United States has increased enormously. It's also the case that the Saudis, again, continue to go ahead and to produce an enormous amount. But it's also been the case that the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a significant slowdown in growth, again, in China. That's, again, paralleled, again, by this continued slow growth that we happen to see in Europe as well. All of that means that the demand for oil has come down, which means prices have come down as well in the face of continued increases in supply.
We talk a lot about, slow growth in Europe. We don't talk about as much China. I mean, what are they similar factors for the slow growth in China?
Well, I think the kind of growth, China has enjoyed 30 to 35 years of remarkable growth. It's really hard to talk about the experience of a country that has been as successful in China in sustaining 8.5%, 9% growth as long as it has. China also did extremely well in the face of the international financial crisis, 2008, 2009, in the face, again, of declining external demand, in terms of being able to sustain relatively high rates of growth. Today, unfortunately, they are paying for some of the policies and some of the measures that were taken to try to sustain growth in the context of a declining global demand.
Okay, I want to ask you about the reserves that China has, its oil reserves. About 3 months supply is how I understand it. How important is that stockpile to the bigger picture?
Well, I think for any country, and China's not alone here, any country wants to have a strategic reserve. China has both huge strategic reserves, and they've been trying to use this occasion when oil prices are low, again, to try to fill those reserves up. It's also the case that they have commercial reserves that are probably somewhere in the order of maybe 30 to 40% of the strategic reserves. Any country, the United States, China, these are important for a variety of reasons because you just don't know what's going to happen to tomorrow. So in this sense, this is a good opportunity for China to go ahead and to increase their reserves.
Okay, I want to read something. This was written in the Globe and Mail back in November. At the time, the price of oil was about $72 a barrel, so keep that in mind. Here's what was written. The mere fall in oil prices is a huge win for China. The basic math of a tumble from $115 to $72 a barrel suggests annual savings to the country's drivers and industrial users equivalent to more than 1.5% of current GDP. Like I said, this was written at the end of last year. We're now sitting in the $45, $48 range for oil. What do you make of that comment in the Globe and Mail?
So the math is correct. So we just
You're
went
so
ahead.
polite.
Well, the math is correct. So if we just kind of remember that every day China goes ahead and imports about 5.5 million barrels of oil, If the price goes ahead and goes down $1, what that means for China is they save approximately $2 billion a year. Price goes down $10, they save $20 billion. So the math is right. So there's no question about that. The longer issue is that who is going to be realizing, again, those savings from the fact that the price of petroleum has gone down as much as it has. Here, for example, here in Toronto, here in Canada, you and I probably every week, we go fill our cars. We can see, again, the immediate benefits of the fact that the cost of petroleum has come down. Refiners, again, have to pay less. That gets passed on in the pump. So we go ahead and we benefit from that. It's also the case that businesses, fuel's an important business expense as well. Costs of transportation, again, come down for businesses, so that we may also see it, again, come through in terms of the prices that we pay for a variety of goods and services. If we take a look at China, just from the point of view of the consumer, China's the largest car market in the world, but what we want to remember is that the percentage of households that have cars in China is probably about 20%.
20%?
About 20%. Okay. So that what that means is that just in terms of the percentage of households, and these households, again, that have cars are going to be households that are going to be kind of in the upper end of the income distribution. These are going to be the top 10%, 15%, 20%, again, of all income earners in China. So these households, again, these are the ones with cars. But for most individuals, they don't have cars. But perhaps what's even more important is that not only is there a relatively much smaller percentage of households that happen to have cars, that if we take a look at prices at the pump in China, and so one of the things that I like to do whenever I'm in China and I travel all over, I just go ahead and I take a look, find out what prices are. Well, it turns out that today, so I went ahead and I checked yesterday in terms of what the price happens to be of a liter of gasoline, of petroleum. And so these cross-country comparisons are always a little bit tricky because taxes differ and certain kinds of requirements differ. But today, it's the case that the price of a liter in China is significantly higher than what it is here in Canada. It's also probably about 60 to 70% higher than what it is in the United States. So what that is telling us is that although, again, on one level, China is paying a lot less for the petroleum that it happens to be importing, refiners are paying less, a lot of those gains and benefits certainly have not been reflected in the pumps that consumers are going to be paying. And it may very well be the case that even the prices, again, that businesses, again, that are dependent, again, on petroleum as fuel, as an input into manufacturing, well, it's not exactly certain, again, that they're, again, so far have been able to realize the gains as well.
All right, Lauren, you mentioned that 20%, 1 in 5 families in China own a car. Oil's cheap. Does that mean more Chinese people are going to go out and buy more cars?
Well, it certainly makes the cost of having a car much less. But one of the things that we want to remember that, there's an awful lot of households that, probably next to having your house, buying your house, a car, well, maybe financing your children's education. Having a car is a very important expenditure. So certainly there's an awful lot of individuals, a lot of households who would like to be able to, and so in that sense it might actually help to reduce the expense, again, of owning a car. But if you happen to be in one of the bigger cities these days, well, probably even more difficult than just the expense is basically getting a license to be able to go ahead and to buy a car or have a license that's going to allow you to use the car.
The government allows only certain people to buy cars.
Well, that's exactly right. And so in part, if you take a look at a city like Beijing, where every year the number of new cars is probably between 350 and 400,000. That's just kind of a mind-boggling number. But because they're so concerned, again, about the implications of the car and the auto for pollution, that what they want to do is they want to restrict, again, the number of cars that are on the road. And so given that in a city like Beijing, there's a really long list of people who would just love to be able to go out and to buy cars and to own a car and to use a car, they effectively have to ration the number of individuals and restrict the number of individuals who, in fact, are going to be able to own a car and use a car within the city limits.
And when we talk about imported goods, the cost of importing goods as it goes down, do you foresee that being passed on to Chinese consumers?
Again, I think it's one of those things, again, that we're just going to have to wait and see. So in terms of any kind of benefits, they're going to depend on what happens on the exchange rate, and then it's going to be a totally separate matter, the extent to which those ultimately get passed on to consumers in the form of lower prices.
I'm interested because, your sort of general message, we're just going to have to wait and see how this plays out. Is that the approach of the Chinese government? Are they sort of waiting and seeing what's going to happen with the price of oil?
Well, I think that what they're trying to do is that they don't know, they don't have crystal balls either. And so what they're trying to do is that they're trying to take advantage, again, of the opportunity to go ahead and to move in a number of directions. And so in a complementary way, one of the things that China has been trying to do is to try to kind of move in terms of push its entire energy policy. That it recognizes, that here again is an economy where coal, fossil fuels have been the most important source of fuel for a relatively long period of time, maybe 70%, maybe 75%. So here again, all of a sudden, that the cost of, fuel, the cost of petroleum has gone ahead and come down, but they also recognize that they have to begin to move towards cleaner fuels, that they need a new energy strategy, that they need an energy strategy where the prices, again, that the cost of energy better reflect, again, what the costs are. So they're doing a variety of things to try to take advantage of these opportunities.
I'm glad you brought that up, because China has cities, large cities especially, and we've all seen the pictures, very polluted, and I understand that China's trying to move into, greener energy sources. Will the cheap oil affect that plan?
Well, probably not. And I think that the reason why that it won't, that although, there's probably a number of reasons in terms of why it won't. So first of all, again, we want to remember that a good portion, again, of China's energy is in fact coming from fossil fuels, maybe 70%. The rest is coming from things like hydroelectric. It's coming a small amount from nuclear. It's also coming from things like renewables, primarily solar, biomass, as well as wind turbines. China, I think, recognizes the need that they need to move to cleaner energy sources. And one of the things that they've been doing is that they've, even in the case of fossil fuels, that they've invested enormously in new technologies, cleaner, again, power plants, as a way to try to reduce emissions. So what they're doing, again, right now, and right now is, in fact, a very good time for them to do so. Because usually the problem in China is that they don't have as much energy, they don't have as much electricity, they don't have as much power as they need. And so that they're dependent, again, on power from all kinds of sources. Today, as a consequence of the fact that the economy is growing much more slowly than what it has in the past, that some of these energy-intensive sectors' growth has slowed considerably, the demand for energy in China has also gone ahead and declined considerably as well. So this actually provides them an opportunity, when demand is relatively low, to go ahead and to make some really important decisions and investment in their energy sector. They're going to help to kind of upgrade existing facilities, go ahead and mothball older plants that may not be very efficient and that are polluters, as well as to continue to go ahead and to encourage the investments in the newer, cleaner kinds of technologies. China has certainly been doing that in terms of nuclear. They have very, very ambitious plans for their nuclear sector, and in terms of the number of nuclear plants that they're going to be building, that they've invested enormously in terms of their solar sector. And we've certainly been beneficiaries, at least here in the West, of the enormous development of China's solar sector. The reason why prices of solar panels are so much lower than what they've had been in the past is because of China and the enormous reduction in costs that China's been enabled all of us to be able to go ahead and enjoy. So China will use this occasion, again, when growth has slowed, demand for energy is a bit lower. They'll use this as an opportunity to begin to continue to go ahead, push forward with respect to its energy policy, to rationalize energy use. And although at one level, that what it means is that because the cost of some of these other fuels become a little bit less expensive, and so either the subsidies that you might need to give to renewables might be a little bit higher, I think China's more than willing to kind of live with that as a way to try to push and promote these alternatives.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to ask about the third prong. We talked about being the leading oil importer and consumer. I want to talk about its domestic oil industry as a producer. Any effect there? And number 4 in the world. I was surprised by that, reading that about China. I didn't actually know that. But how is this going to affect China's own domestic oil production?
Well, I don't know an awful lot about China's petroleum sector, but one of the things, again, that we do know is that it's a sector, again, that tends to be state-dominated. It's a sector, again, that hasn't been particularly efficient and productive. And so here we have a sector where all of a sudden now, the price, again, that they're going to be getting paid is all of a sudden a lot lower. So what I, in fact, kind of anticipate that with this falling price, again, of crude petroleum, it's certainly going to affect, again, those, again, firms, again, in China that are involved, again, in crude petroleum production. Maybe the biggest beneficiaries may be the refineries. At least those are involved in the refining end of the business, that insofar as that the cost of the crude petroleum comes down, but maybe the price, again, that end users pay remains the same, those margins are going to be a little bit larger. But I think that you hit on a very good point, that China is a producer, and that with falling prices, and given, again, that they're a relatively high-cost producer, I think this is going to have some cost.
You were in China a couple months ago in December, so that time oil's about $70. I mean, is it average, everyday Chinese person concerned about? I mean, in Canada, most people are concerned about the price of oil right now. Is the average Chinese person concerned about it?
I would say that the average Chinese person is not concerned and is not totally aware of it. That those individuals who, if you
is that deliberate? That they're not?
No, I don't know. I don't believe it's deliberate in any way. But I think, again, that for most of us, every week when we go and we fill up our cars we have a clear indication, again, of what the price of gasoline happens to be. That at least in the case of most Chinese, that's not going to be the same thing. So they're not going to be going to the pump again all the time, and that they're not going to be always again feeling again the consequences or the cost of either rising petroleum prices or falling petroleum prices. So I think that they're much less aware, less sensitive again to what these rising, falling prices may mean.
Every time I drive by a gas station here, I'm like, has it dropped? Has it dropped? Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.